To kick us off, just thinking about economic inactivity, this has reached a scale now where what we're looking at is systemic exclusion. We did analysis in some of our coastal towns, 55 of these, and just in those towns, all of which are significantly deprived, we're looking at, 1 million people economically inactive, a fifth with no qualifications, 250,000 who were already in the never worked, long-term unemployed category. But it isn't just about deprivation. Economic inactivity sits at an intersection of health, deprivation, and skills and poverty. It really is across all of these elements and barriers that we have to think about this. We know that people who are not working are disproportionately affected with long-term physical and mental health conditions. In many areas, we're looking at intergenerational poverty, and in our deprived areas particularly, there's very strong correlations of educational disadvantage and unemployment. So this is actually not just an employment issue. This is something that's fundamental to health and skills. It's way more than an equality and diversity agenda. It's much more than something good or nice to do. This fundamentally speaks to the long-term workforce strategy and really being able to expand that talent pool to meet future labour market needs. Because it's particularly in the NHS and social care, we've relied for a long time on overseas workers, and that isn't sustainable for the future. So we've really got to be able to work with local labour markets and the reality of those. It isn't just about reducing people who've never worked from remaining in that category. It's about re-entry to the workforce and remaining in the workforce. Preventing health deterioration. Work is good for us mentally, emotionally, and physically. Good work. So preventing health deterioration and preventing long-term health problems is absolutely key to this. But it's also about supporting local systems to build resilience in our communities, particularly where they've suffered for many years from decline and deprivation. And if we don't really grasp this as part of the mainstream and recognizing it across these different areas, it undermines the entire workforce strategy. It completely aligns with current national priority drivers. Get Britain working, and Connect to Work has been rolled out, the collaborative, locally led approaches to tackling these areas of hidden unemployment. The NHS long-term workforce plan is due to come out this year, but we're also seeing changes in the NHS architecture as integrated care systems move to strategic commissioning roles. So being able to really embed this as business as usual within provider collaboratives and local employers where workforce planning will be driven is absolutely key, not as a project, but as that business as usual. Workwell is being rolled out to other areas, so coordinating with that health-led employment support, particularly to keep people in work, where they're at risk of falling out due to health issues, is key. And local skills partnerships, thinking not just about health and social care, but more broadly in terms of regional footprints and what this means in terms of skills priorities and sector-specific plans going forward. The More and Different programme, we had 10 sites for these. It was a precursor really to widening access. Many of these are still very active in that space as well. And More and Different gave us the iceberg model, the 6 critical intervention points. So a lot of attention often goes at the top of the iceberg in terms of recruitment and vacancies, but the real work is beneath the waterline, particularly thinking about raising awareness, pre-application, pre-employment support, and changing our HR and practice processes to really extend and involve people better and create career pathways. I'll come back to this in terms of insights from widening access demonstrators and More and Different and what that means. We have a coastal navigators network, and there's 18 sites in that now, all priority coastal areas, and they all to some degree are involved with reducing economic inactivity as well. Some of them solely focused on that, others combining that with key health issues, including mental health, young people and needs, healthy aging. So there's a variety of issues that we're currently confronted with in our coastal areas that come together in that economic inactivity space. And of course, we've got the 10 widening access demonstrator sites. Interestingly, a third of these are actually coastal, and BBI have been working specifically within Kent and Medway and Lincolnshire. What have they made visible so far? Well, place really matters profoundly. It's essential to be able to think about that very local context. It isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, and of course there isn't a budget for place. It's still often a difficult issue to get right in terms of really having the right kind of collaboration and thinking of place rather than issues or conditions. I think as well, sort of we've had a number of top-down programs, somewhat target-driven, and that can put tensions and pressures when thinking about sustainability. We've learned a lot about the importance of the employer engagement and involvement, and particularly being able to address employer-side constraints within this space. And that this isn't just about registered roles within the NHS and health, thinking very particularly about the opportunities in social care in different ways, but also that 350 roles that exist within our NHS system, thinking about digital roles, estates, facilities, and broadening it out to beyond a narrow health focus. Some of the key insights that come forward, that employer engagement isn't a one-off thing. It really needs a structured, sustained support to actually change practice, and really being able to think about better and more effective ways to engage with and sustain involvement with employers. Being data-led, really having good vacancy intelligence and retention tracking are essential. Understanding the drop-off points where they are so we can target interventions more precisely and better, and keeping candidates engaged throughout the recruitment journey. And also in terms of recruitment, and we'll hear from JP as part of this workshop in terms of some really innovative approaches to how we can use digital tools to engage a different and wider pool of applicants. And connected to that is the issue of trust, actually having trusted authority voices to make that connection and reach to people. Passive advertising doesn't cut it. We need that hyper-local targeting and authentic voices. The skills focus is key, thinking about non-traditional pathways into roles, boot camps, being able to be more creative with apprenticeships, having clear entry-level routes that are accessible and tied specifically to opportunities. And that broader awareness issue carries on, especially tackling people's thoughts that this isn't a role for me, I wouldn't fit into that, and really understanding how they can do. Just to think about these a bit more, that trust issue is key. As I say, passive advertising doesn't work. We need to be more personalised in that referrals with visible local role models, authentic pathways that actually resonate with people's lives. It expands the reach beyond people that are already engaged through existing employment systems. It reduces that self-exclusion, that thinking it's not me, if we can actually get people to be involved in this way. And that has a knock-on effect. It not only improves the matching into roles, but it has a knock-on effect in terms of retention. And it builds confidence on both sides, not just for applicants, but for employers, because we need employers to be confident that they're getting people that are suited to the role and actually want to do the roles. So that trust issue runs across the piece. And linked to that, having clear entry points, thinking especially about those that don't pursue a traditional academic path, and that is core to the widening access approach, and more inclusive employment. So we've seen how boot camps can offer that more intensive focused training, and this is key as well in actually to be able to not send cold referrals straight to employers, but actually to have a process by which they're coming into that employment with some degree of preparation. Being more creative with apprenticeships on that place level basis, thinking particularly about seasonal apprenticeships, something very relevant in our coastal areas, but also more cross-sector approaches, and not just having one narrow apprenticeship route, but being able to develop those more creatively and collaboratively. And from the outset of that entry point, we have to be clear what the progression is. It has to be involved from the very, very beginning so that people can see a direction and understand that there's structured support as they start and through that onboarding process and retention. And keeping employers engaged is is one of the strongest messages to come out from our involvement with the Widening Access Demonstrators pilots. There's a lot of enthusiasm and commitment expressed at the outset from employers, but that's fragile if it's not followed up, if it isn't sustained in terms of contact. And there are flashpoints within the employment cycle as well. Initially, a lot of things start with the HR, but as they move to where people are actually placed, we can see dropout and some loss. So really being able to involve the placement teams, middle managers that are involved in that onboarding and ongoing maintenance of people is really key. And there's a fundamental brokerage role with employers to continue that relationship management and keep people, keep employers actually motivated and involved. What does all this mean then in terms of the iceberg model? With that awareness and trust and identity is really key, being able to properly tackle that this couldn't be for me before any formal process begins at the very outset of engagement. And pre-application, pre-employment support needs to be both practical and psychological, so we can address overcoming practical issues like transport problems where they exist, but also thinking about, the confidence of people and their awareness and ability to think that they can do this. The application filtering is a constant battle. We are seeing now really good examples of employers changing this very significantly and being much more open in what they're doing, and shifting to an interview that isn't about testing for failure, but actually testing for the potential of people and rewarding experience rather than just qualifications. And that induction extended period, at least 3 months or even longer, but it's more about having a personalized approach to onboarding, and that very clear belief in the future that this is not just an entry point role, that's actually linked to substantial and meaningful career pathways. Where we're at, I think, now and moving beyond the pilot phase is this now has to not be a standalone program, but positioned actually as a system lever, embedded properly within our workforce strategy, thinking especially about long-term workforce planning, and also a prevention strategy, and really starting to view and see employment initiatives of this kind as a public health intervention. And of course, it's part of economic development strategy, building sustained productivity in some of our more deprived areas, and particularly around coastal, and an anchor institution strategy, moving beyond a procurement role in terms of anchor strategies, and actually using that fundamental shift in employment practices to address these other things. It's not a nice thing to do. This is actually critical to our agenda going forward for workforce prevention and long-term economic productivity. And the converse, if we don't do this, it's not a neutral impact if these programs stopped. The harm currently, the intergenerational issues particularly, are really hard to reverse. So workforce shortages deepen, and economic inactivity will continue to rise with all the costs and problems associated with that, and alongside it, worsening health inequalities. And regional divergence will grow. We'll see greater disparities in terms of that. So we need to move from learning to embedding this. What can we scale now? That employer brokerage elements, absolutely. We've learned loads about that. More creative entry routes and thinking differently about apprenticeships, that structured in-work support, use of things like community connectors, that trusted voice, but also the digital targeting. These are things we can act on now and scale up. Some things need some further work, thinking further about that sustained retention and progression tracking to really get that right over the long term, especially when people choose themselves not to engage with that. Greater employer incentives, particularly to institute and embed that practice change. How we actually address this within those areas that have very thin labour markets and fewer opportunities in terms of localised employers, and being able to align vacancy controls more strongly with where we have these inclusion targets. And so it's not just a kind of blank freeze on things. Some things are going to require greater national alignments. We need to embed this in within Connect to Work and integration with Workwell. As the NHS workforce strategy evolves and comes out, and that long-term planning and how that translates into local systems, it has to be embedded there, and cross-departmental coordination across DWP, health, NHSE, and within local government.
Thank you everyone for having me. I wanted to share with you some of the things we've learnt or demonstrated across WAD and maybe some other similar programs in Kent, but also in other parts of the country, because I think there's learning here in the digital space that could be useful for everybody. So we're just going to look at one program run in Thanet, a quick view of what works and also what to avoid, and then some suggestions for increasing sustainability and scaling projects in the future. A lot of this resonates with what people have already been saying, but it's very important, particularly with programs like the Widening Access Demonstrators, that we design communications to be inclusive. And I'll come back to this point on scale in a little bit, but having a mixture of human, physical and digital is essential. And we're also seeing in other places that the story-based messaging is really important, particularly when you're dealing with anxious or people who have a lot of intersecting challenges. As with everything in the public sector, we've got to be able to do this in a way that is always saving money, be it on saving in care costs, but also making use of existing free channels and reducing waste whenever we can. And you can't do 1 and 2 without 3. So we need to make sure that everything we do is measured and that we evaluate in real time and optimize in real time. So those are some of the principles behind what we've done. In working with Social Enterprise Kent in Thanet, we were using a mixture of adverts placed around search results for terms relating to job search, careers, mental and physical health conditions, but also targeting adverts onto job sites, so people who are actively looking for work or changes in career, using some social media, Meta, which is Facebook and Instagram for older audiences, and Snapchat for those younger audiences. And we placed adverts in all those places and brought them through to a really simple, accessible web page, and were then able to collect a small amount of information from them and pass those contact details through to Social Enterprise Kent. Had about 105 inquiries so far. We actually had to turn it off a couple of times because we were creating little backlogs, but that is 100 more inquiries than had been generated in the period before. 37 of those have been considered to be proper referrals. 15 are already on the course, with 2 more people joining at the moment. So it's really worked to accelerate not just awareness, not just interaction, although this has been seen by probably well over 100,000 people, but to actually generate those outcomes and accelerate those outcomes too. So it's really important to amplify to everyone here that we've tried sending traffic through to generic NHS or council created pages, and we get nothing like these sorts of results. So our recommendation would be, until you've simplified that user experience, don't spend any money on paid media. Getting that right and mobile friendly, and helping people understand what support is there for them is absolutely essential. So that is the foundation of a lot of this. I mentioned their search, but also remarketing is really important. Most people will click, land and bounce. And if they accept cookies, we can go and find them on wherever they are online and give them another opportunity to come back and engage. The number of people that see an ad, click and apply is an absolute minority. The vast majority of people consider and move down that sort of marketing funnel over time. We also found that news and Snapchat work particularly well in terms of driving traffic through. One thing that is also worth noting is that as these campaigns progress, the first stage is usually the least efficient. And then using a mixture of machine learning and audience building and remarketing, we're able to get that cost per inquiry down over time, which is really important for sustainability, and playing into that idea that we can get as near to zero the cost for getting someone engaged in one of these programs. So that was very reassuring to see, you know, almost, well, more than a 50% reduction in cost per inquiry as we got more efficient. But this is only reaching 9% of Kent's low-income population being geo-targeted just to Thanet at the moment. And I thought it might be worth thinking about or making the case for amplification and scaling. We work with lots and lots of councils. There are lots of organisations that we support, including ICBs, and we know that on the ground community projects, engaging with people, co-production, engagement, all these sort of things, there is a lot of this that goes on, and it's invaluable. The quality of feedback you get is absolutely essential. However, we are very bad at judging scale. I give people this little test sometimes. I say, how many people are in that heart? Have a guess in your own minds. We get answers ranging from 200 to 10,000. Well, the answer is 1,000 people. There's only 1,000 people there. That is what 35,000 people looks like. So I would just challenge you to think, well, can you prove that previous widening access or other programs similar have been seen by an audience that size frequently? Because if not, we might be accelerating inequalities. And when you look at wider areas, for example, in Kent, we need to be thinking in the hundreds of thousands. That's Ed Sheeran at Melbourne. That's what 100,000 people looks like. How frequently are you confident that you've engaged that many people? And at scale across large county regions, we need to be thinking about that many people and some when we're talking about the audiences we need to interact with. So in Thanet, we had about 10,000 people actively click, interact, share, like some element of the campaign. But if you look at that in the context of Kent, that's the proportion of the population that we've actually reached. So there is significant work to do or opportunity to improve, amplify, and scale the impact of these campaigns. That's the sort of size of the audience that is unreached in Kent so far. And so I was just doing these things to sort of give you a visualization of, there is the on the ground, high quality interaction with relatively small groups. But what the digital technology enables us to do is to rapidly scale this out to everybody and include everybody. I wanted to share some examples of how we could sustain these approaches. This is a campaign in Milton Keynes targeted at young people. I won't play the video now. I think we just share the slides afterwards. But it was actually funded by the Police and Crime Commissioner. They'd noticed emerging county lines behaviour. And we know that all forms of extreme behaviours, particularly by young males, can be driven by a sense of lack of opportunity. And so what we did was we went out and we used TikTok and Snapchat in Milton Keynes to measure amongst 13 to 21-year-olds their perception of opportunity in Milton Keynes for them. And only about 28% of young people believed there was opportunity for them in Milton Keynes. We then created a series of stories, one of which is here, about this one was about an unpaid carer looking after his mum, then getting support with a course, and then being able to look after his mum better and having a career in social care. There was another campaign about gaming, leading people to work for the Thames Valley Police Cadets, and there was another campaign about getting into engineering roles in the area. And so we put these stories in front of people. Note, no mention of knives, drugs, anything like that. Purely positive, purely talking about opportunity. And in sharing these stories, we were able to generate inquiries for recruits to the Thames Valley Police Cadets and also into social care training, which was a positive. But even better, when we then went and asked young people in Milton Keynes, do you think there's opportunity here for you? We'd increase that percentage, only by 5%. But that sense of putting opportunity in front of young people, which is what we're doing here, actually helps to have all sorts of community cohesion type impacts. So reducing the pool of people potentially who might fall prey to other sorts of dark forces. So this approach, working with police, with blue light, with social care, with local universities, could be a way of further funding and sustaining these kinds of approaches, and obviously borrowing these approaches from other parts of the country. Something we're hoping to do in Kent is to start using the council's owned communications estate. So free advertising across out of home, free advertising in relevant places on their website, free advertising in their e-newsletters. Councils are often the biggest media owner in their area, but they rarely act like it. So that's the sort of the next free and hopefully a really sustainable approach to keeping this campaign running. I just wanted to show you as well that it's not just Kent where this has worked well, and I will share all of these afterwards. But in Lincolnshire, we've been trying similar approaches. This campaign started using just search activity, but then generated around 80 inquiries. And we've recently ramped up using things learnt in Kent, and that's working really well. And we'll obviously be able to report back on that soon. So that's another widening access demonstrator. And also I heard earlier on, the mention of anchor employers. So this work around the More and Different program, not widening access, but very similar, promoting careers with anchor employers, including adult social care, a central government department, into the NHS. Sorry, it might take a moment to load, but all of them generating significant inquiries. Freedom Leisure, a local leisure centre. I heard you, Munya, mentioning that. But these approaches aren't just applicable in this instance with widening access, but can be applicable to many other things as well. So just to summarise, we're able to prove rapid acceleration of the widening access programme in Thanet and a reducing cost per outcome. There's a lot more to do in Kent. We think there's a lot of opportunity that will help sustain these sorts of programmes with cross public sector campaign collaboration. We think that council-owned channels are a free and highly sustainable way of reducing cost per outcome. And so overall, there's a lot of opportunity to increase reach, to increase inclusion, and further reduce cost per outcome.